Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to you all for another exciting discussion of From Home Export Days, a series of panels produced by the Centre National de la Musique. I am Françoise Claire, head of classical music for the Centre National de la Musique, and together with our best friend and favorite moderator, Eric Denut, on my right, we are going to explore another burning topic today. The world has changed enormously since the coming of the internet some 25 years ago. And obviously the music world has been deeply impacted by this evolution and has followed a large mutation. Today, one can't be a musician without gaining presence on the internet, on Google, on YouTube, on Spotify, on using all the digital tools that are available and developing since. And some platforms are pretending to be the biggest concert hall of the world. So we are going to discuss that today, and Eric will moderate the discussion. And we are very grateful to all our guests and panelists to be with us today. We hope you will enjoy this conversation, and we hope to see you soon again. Eric, over to you now.
Thank you so much, François. I remember very well a couple of months ago, as we were even talking about this held discussion, we were just in the middle of a lockdown, like so many of us, and we received the very first figures of a kind of strong growth of conception of classical music on the web. There was only the web. There were no stage open at that period in the world. But the problem was, I mean, we were just happy about that. But the problem was we were not sure it was about the same classical music, under quotation marks, and the one we learned in our universities and music schools. And that's why we decided to invite a specialist panel, some experts who already before confinements, before lockdowns, before COVID, show very strong signals of having understood that the world of classical music had been changing. So we started with, I will present now our guests. Thanks so much for being with us. Arna Einarsdottir. Arna comes from Iceland. You may have known her as a general manager of the Icelandic Symphonic Orchestra, but for a couple of years now, she is the head of the symphony department of the National Center for the Arts in Ottawa, Canada. Good morning, Arna. Thanks for being with us. Gabriel Prokofiev is known as a composer. I mean, the name per se speaks for composing, but Gabriel, as we all know, I mean, at least in the industry, is not only a great composer, he's also a great artistic director. He has founded the NoClassical label and will tell us much more about his current activities. Thanks so much, Gabriel, for being with us today. Christian Karlsen is a musician too. He's a conductor, quite famous in the contemporary new music scene, but not only. He has, for instance, recorded for a couple of months the Concierto de Aranjuez, which is not really avant-garde, I would say, in a recording which will probably be part of the best recordings of last year. And he's also the founder in Stockholm, his birthplace, or at least the place where he's living, of misarticulating, Gränsländet Symfonisk, not at all, okay, more or less, I'm better with IKEA, and Spotify. Okay, so one of the 3 Swedish brands which count now in the culture. Thank you so much, Christian. And I think you are now home from Stockholm, is that right? Or you're already on tour?
I'm in Gothenburg, but
oh, you're in Gothenburg. Okay, so you're already on tour.
Ish, yeah.
And last but not least, we have Chaz Jenkins with us. We are very proud of having Chaz. We know Chaz for, I mean, everyone knows Chaz because everyone knows what he created. He created London Symphony Orchestra live, as everyone was wishing, you know, to get a signature by Decca, Sony Classical, EMI, Warner Classics, or so on, or Deutsche Grammophon. He was already one of the top 3 names in the symphonic world 15, 20 years ago, quasi 2 decades, 1.5 decade, let's say. He was already creating, and everyone, I remember, I was a young industry executive at that time, and everyone tried to find a short way to his diary and schedule plan to get 30 minutes. And he was so generous to explain, so probably he did it 500 times to people who never did what he did in the end, or did it 20 years later or 15 years later, what now everyone has done. He will tell us more about the success story of the LSO Live, but he's now the chief commercial officer, I think, worldwide of Chartmetric, and he will also tell us much more about Chartmetric. Probably not everyone knows, but the one who knows it know what it means as a competitive advantage to have partnership with them. So thanks, Chaz, being with us, Chaz of Chartmetric. Let's start maybe with Arna first. As I was describing the fact that Françoise and I knew about you through the very fact that you were trying already long time before COVID to change the rules of the game. There was one show which a lot of us appreciate very much, and not every one of us has seen on stage, but at least got some glimpse through the screens and the recorded audiovisual testimony. That's Live Reflected. Live Reflected is a multimedia show, and I won't tell more about that, but maybe Arna can tell us how it came that the National Arts Center in Ottawa produced this project, and what it means now that we have been through these 15, 18 months of quasi-digital only.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, basically, Live Reflected, that kind of took place before I joined the NAC Orchestra and the NAC. But, you know, of course, because, you know, the NAC is not, it doesn't only have the orchestra, it also has English theater, it has French theater, dance theater, it has now indigenous theater since 2019. And so it's a very kind of multi-dimensional, multi-discipline, you know, and a sort of a melting pot and creative melting pot. So it really creates this kind of a ecosystem for something like, you know, Live Reflected to be born out of. And so Live Reflected tells these stories of 4 Canadian women in a multimedia way, and it's really pushing the concert format. And when I saw it 2016, that actually was kind of, and when they then, you know, called me and asked if I was interested in this position to take on the orchestra, I mean, that was kind of the reason I thought, okay, yes, I'm very excited, you know, something that can, this is really what I want to explore. And actually, because of all the work that had been done, you know, before, when we were then suddenly faced with this horrible, terrible crisis, and everything was just blown away in an instant, we actually jumped kind of back on this wagon and created and could kind of call into our creative partners and worked on a project that we are hoping to launch, or are launching in August, where we actually kind of taking Live Reflected to the next level. We're really pushing the boundaries of the digital medium. Again, partnering with artistic musicians that are sort of our creative partners, curators for TV episodes, really. And where we kind of just approach them and ask them, you know, do you want to collaborate with us? Can you use the orchestra as your megaphone? Can you respond to our current times? Not just the COVID, but of course here in North America with the Black Lives Matter kind of exploding, you know, in our sort of societies, and really just figuring out a way, is this tool useful for you to really respond? And of course, because like, you know, we all know with orchestras where we plan like 2 years, 3 years ahead, suddenly we were giving a free space to just be really, really creative. And because of this work that had already taken place there, the knowledge was there. We could build on that experience, we could build on that knowledge, and we just jumped. And it was a complete miracle, because we have been in such a state here in Ontario. We've more or less been locked in a lockdown. And we managed to record in between 2 lockdowns. So it opened up in February. We had like few weeks of, you know, February and March, then a lockdown in April. and we've been locked down since. So it's, I don't know, it was just like pure miracle. And nobody had to be isolated except my family. And I was the only one that could, because my son got COVID. But, otherwise, 200 people working on this project during the worst of times, in the most complicated situation imaginable, we managed to do it. So it was just incredible.
And how can we see that project? What will be this future?
So this will be out in August. So we're in the post-production now. I mean, it's so complicated. And we're there, we're really trying to, as I say, we work with these curators, musicians, Misa Prokofiev, the soprano, an amazing, and she actually took us back to Nova Scotia to explore her roots, the roots of her heritage. And then Anna Sokolovic, a composer, Nicole Lisey, another composer, and then an indigenous shooting star, Shawnee Kish. And she was just, it was just, all of these curators gave us such an incredibly powerful way of collaborating. So, and then we worked with graphic designers, and we're sort of pushing this boundary. So using 3D gaming, augmented reality, just really suddenly everything comes alive and you just sort of, so it's going to be, so excited. What I've seen so far is mind-blowing, but I haven't seen the full end product, so we'll see.
And it comes out in movie theaters or on platforms? Or?
This is for TV. We're hoping
TV. Yeah. You said it. Okay, so that's for the public TV in Canada. It's a public channel.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much for this very lively testimony of what can be done based on the former experience, which was per se game changing. And Live Reflected are still a touring live. Yeah, I mean, will be part of the repertoire now of the orchestra.
It is, of course. I mean, we did tour. We toured in 2019 to Europe, where we had this whole performed this in Gothenburg and in Paris, and it was an amazing, incredible. But of course, it's so hugely expensive, as you can imagine, to tour with. So certainly it's on our roster.
So you have built a new kind of repertoire, which expands the boundaries, or pushes the boundaries, as you said, of the traditional concert repertoire, which you are still practicing, of course. That probably also a great definition of, I won't say the name again, not to be ridiculous. So Christian, as you were thinking about Gränsländet, okay, you know what? That was already 3 years ago, if I'm right.
The first edition of the festival.
Yeah.
I'll give the name. It's called Gränsländet.
I will never do it. Okay.
Which means the borderland in Swedish.
Okay.
So yeah.
And that was 2019. Is it right?
I think. No. 2018 was the first time we did it.
Okay, so 3 years ago.
Okay, so tell us in 2017, and so I think it's either the 4th or the 5th time this year, depending on how you count, which confuses everyone. Okay, so tell us how you came to that idea, which is quite exceptional in the classical music world. I should tell you first what it is. Basically, it's basically a festival for classical music in the worst possible place for classical music. It's in a nightclub that is outdoor, underneath a highway bridge. It's not a highway bridge and a metro bridge. Sorry. So there's a metro coming about 30 meters above you every 30 seconds. But it's a great place. Sort of in the middle of Stockholm, on the highway out of Stockholm, or right underneath it. And basically, the idea basically came from me and my colleague David Huang, that I produced the festival with, that we had for a long time been playing concerts with orchestras and in concert halls in Sweden and around Europe, and realizing that that everyone that comes to listen to our concerts are about 35, 40 years older than ourselves. And it's not really an issue, because there's a lot of people that loves music and at that age, and it's all fine. But we both thought it was a bit of a pity that that our own generation, I think mainly are afraid of the concert hall. Not every concert hall in the world has this issue, but a lot of concert hall has the thing that the door is kind of scary, the front door, that you don't dare to kind of buy a ticket to it and open it and just try it out, because you have no idea what it is. There's so many people that have just never been, so they just don't know what it is. And we've been told that the music is the issue for so long by some managers of orchestra, that young people don't like classical music because you discover it later, which is maybe partly fair, but we have always been thinking that you discover the social codes of the general concert hall. Let's not attack anyone specific, but there's so many examples of this that is not, but that we thought we wanted to try and see if this was true, and so we took the music to a place where we know that a lot of young people feel at home and comfortable in Stockholm, and it was for what we can think a huge success from the beginning. We do basically a festival over 2 days and 2 nights, and the nightclub experience is still there. So say between 7 and 10 we play symphonic music, and from Saturday on a Friday, and then from 11 the nightclub starts, and then we have also, you can go clubbing, and then if you can go listen to a Beethoven string quartet, and then you go somewhere else and hang out, and it's kind of a space for a different social context where the music can exist. So that's the idea, and we do it now. The festival is 2 days and 2 nights, we say, over, we had around 6,500 visitors in the first edition and the second one, which we were very happy with. And I think about in the one before COVID, I think about half of the audience actively comes to our festival, and the other half gets exposed to it, which is sort of the mixture that we like. So we've been playing all kinds of music, everything from Beethoven symphony, Tchaikovsky symphonies, to Mozart, Ravel, to a lot of contemporary music, Xenakis, Olivieros, Lily Boulanger, Anders Hillborg. I mean, and I think just to finish on a kind of other note, that this kind of myth that new classical music is difficult and old classical music is attractive is also, I think, a bit of a myth. Some contemporary music is for sure very challenging for a new listener, and some is not. And it's not necessarily the ones that we think. And also with the old repertoire, some is very, very easy accessible, let's say, I'll put it like that, and some is not. And it's again not the ones that our kind of general consensus is, I think. But we have done it now for 2 years before COVID, and now one bit strange edition with a live stream last year. And so, I mean, we don't know much, but this is at least something we can, conclusions that can already be drawn is that it's not the music that is issue if you want to play for young people. And this issue of old and new is also a myth.
Maybe an insider's question. You had no problem convincing some artists, colleagues, to take part of a festival which happens 30 meters behind a motorway and the tube railway. So you had the musicians being conscious of the necessity to speak to this kind of audience in a completely new context, or you had to struggle with that?
No, not really. I mean, on the other hand, we have also not worked with, we raise enough money that we can hire our own orchestra, so that everyone is there by choice. So there's not, I mean, I assume if you would do this with an institution orchestra, you would have to have a bigger conversation before, I assume. But as far as I know, the issue with our festival and like people wanting to perform in it has nothing to do with the weird circumstance. I think everyone understands that you lose something, you gain something there. Let's say it's not, you don't have this kind of like you can hear a hairpin fall on the floor. We have a great sound in here also that makes things sound good. That helps. I mean, it's a heavy project. That's for sure. We play, I think, what a normal orchestra does in 3.5 weeks in Scandinavia, in 6 days. So some people think, okay, this was great fun, but that aspect is too heavy. But I mean, everyone is there by choice, and I think like 80-90% of the musicians want to come back and play the next year. So I think it's a good track record. I mean, I think most musicians want to come to a new audience. I think there are, if you talk to them, I mean, they don't. I mean, musician's life is very hard and complicated and has many aspects, and it might be sides to a project that might be difficult, and therefore you might hear complaints about it, and that might not necessarily be about the kind of general concept. And I think in general in classical music we need to get back to the kind of core of what we do, in the sense also that the meeting between the music and an audience has to be more central, and try to get rid of everything, all our traditions that are in the way of that. Not all our traditions are bad. Many are really fantastic. And the idea that you can go into a concert hall and it's quiet for 2 hours is actually something that's very attractive. That I think it's a mistake also to think that all our traditions are our enemy, but some definitely are. And I think one has to be very conscious and smart and thoughtful about when we think about change and what we want to change and what we want to keep, and try to, reimagine also our traditions in sort of a new world, in a new. I mean in a new world, meaning that we have to move from the 1950s to the 2020s, not that we have to go from 2019 to 2021. I mean, I think many of our sort of habits stems from 3 generations ago and a different kind of time, and some of those are nice, but not all of them are, and some of them can just be reimagined in our time, and some it's also okay if they vanish. I think it's okay also for a living art form. Thing can change. It's not necessarily progression. It's just, we have a different kind of world and different kind of social context and habits, and we have to adopt the things that are around, let's say, the art form to it, not necessarily the art form.
Understood. So I think it was great having 2 different feedbacks of 2 ways of contextualizing the new way music. But that was all of those both experiences were about live music in some way. Maybe let's switch with Chaz and Gabriel about recorded music, or what was before something like recording. Maybe let's start with Chaz, since we are talking about the relationships between musical collective like a symphonic orchestra or an ensemble and new audiences. So Chaz, my apologies, we come back to Chartmetric, but let's start maybe with LSO if you are so nice to remind you a little bit, what were the major discussions at this time? Was it so clear for everyone that you had to launch your own label? So tell us a little bit more about the inception time. And when was that exactly?
It was really in 1999. So summer of 1999. God, that sounds a long time ago. We were having discussions about the idea of setting up a label. And then suddenly in the second week of July 1999, a college kid in America set up a website called Napster. And that almost was a signal that we needed to launch our own label. That may sound completely insane looking back now, because of course Napster led to, phenomenal disruption in the music industry. It cost tens of thousands of jobs. It decimated the livelihoods of many musicians. But Napster signaled a number of changes. It propelled digital music and this idea that you didn't need to buy a CD to listen to recordings into the public imagination. And so it started this transformation in music. And for us, at the time I was working for the London Symphony Orchestra, for us, this was an opportunity. You know, the orchestra had made thousands of recordings, more recordings than any other orchestra, but nearly all those recordings were owned by other record companies. You know, we ourselves owned practically nothing. You know, and people often ask, you know, sponsors, you know, audiences would ask about our recordings and would often look at us in bemusement when we said, well, we can't sell you any recordings, or we can't license any recordings to you because we don't own any recordings. And that used to confuse people, because you'd made the recordings, why couldn't you license them? Why couldn't you get involved in a business discussion? And, you know, we saw the internet, we saw that, well, we had a hunch that digital music would grow and in the long term would take over from CDs. And we saw this as an opportunity. We didn't see it as a threat. We saw an opportunity because, you know, the whole reason why there was a recording industry which produced physical products was because the artists themselves could never manage that. You know, artists are great, you know, artists are, I'll get into trouble for saying this. Artists are great at going on tour, doing performances, going around the world, entertaining audiences. And orchestras are good at the logistics of managing all of this. But the logistics involved in the recording industry are very different, and they're more mundane. You know, you give an orchestral member a schedule to go on tour, and, you know, they'll get to the airport, they'll get on the plane. Most of them can do it themselves. A box of CDs cannot do that. A box of CDs needs moving, it needs logistics, it needs manufacturing, it needs warehousing, it needs selling. And all of these things are something which a recording industry had developed in the early 20th century to take care of for musicians. By the late 20th century, you know, 1999, we saw this changing, and Napster really was a signal that, you know, this is going to disrupt the music industry. And at the same time, it's also going to enable us to distribute our recordings, because if you can distribute digitally, why on earth do you need a record company? Why do you need a distributor? Because there's no physical product anymore. This is our opportunity to find a way, a business relationship with the members of the orchestra to produce recordings, to distribute them, to make them available. And we also saw this as being critical, not just because, you know, well, there was the threat that if the recording industry was decimated by Napster, then they'd stop making recordings, therefore the musicians would lose a lot of their income. The other element was a sort of an opportunity, or something which was intrinsic. You know, there's a symbiotic relationship between the recording industry and the performance industry. You know, and we often talk, of course, we've already been talking on this discussion about reaching new audiences. And I think every generation of new audiences expects the greatest artists to not just be performing on stage, but to be making recordings as well. And for those recordings to be part of, you know, the artist's marketing, to be a part of their public exposure. And of course, since 1999, with the emergence of digital services and with the emergence of social networks, we've seen that, you know, content, we no longer even often refer to recordings, we refer to content. Content is distributed not just on commercial streaming services, but on social platforms, on YouTube. Content is freely available. And if you want to market yourself and engage with audiences these days, yes, you need to play live, but yes, you also need to engage digitally with the widest number of people.
Can you tell us a few figures? How many recordings have there been in the meantime by LSO Live?
Oh, God.
About 500, 300?
I think they're getting
close. I can't count it anymore.
I think they're getting close to that figure. I left LSO Live in 2012 to go and work on the dark side, to go and work for Universal Music. Up until that point, we'd made about 100 recordings. So, and we'd also bought back the rights to a lot of recordings which we'd made in the past for other record companies as well. So we had a fairly substantial catalogue, still tiny compared to a major record company. But I think the difference was, although we manufactured CDs and we figured out a way to manage the logistics, our focus was always on the digital space. How do we use recordings to engage the widest possible audience. I mean, you said before that musicians want to perform, musicians want to reach new audiences. And I firmly believe that's true. But of course, as many people as you can possibly reach in 1 year, you know, you could be reaching that number in the recording space in an hour, or certainly in a day. You know, the marketplace globally for music is huge.
And how can you explain that not so many orchestras have built their own company label?
Sorry, why so many?
Why so not so many? Why so few orchestras have done it, have followed the path?
It's, you know, I probably simplified the process a little bit by making it sound simplistic. It is challenging. You know, it depends on so many different factors, you know, particularly, you know, basically the musicians. I mean, it was necessary for us at the LSO to really get the musicians on board with this idea, because you had, you know, a membership of 108 people who, you know, for decades had seen a big chunk of their income come from making recordings, from going into a recording studio, sitting there, performing sessions day after day after day, paid for by classical record companies, and walking out with a session fee at the end. What we were saying was that that's not going to happen. We're going to record live multiple times and edit together so we can produce something which has the same sort of refinement as a studio recording, but you're not going to get paid. Instead, you're going to own the recordings. The musicians, of course, still get paid for appearing live, but instead of sort of getting a session fee for the recording, they're going to receive a share of the profits instead. Now, that, of course, raises the question, is there going to be any profits?
Yeah. And there were some. Yeah, I mean, we were very blunt with the musicians. We said initially that we didn't expect any recording to break even for 5 years. Okay.
And we set that 5-year figure on the basis that, yeah, we might be able to manufacture some CDs and get some money, some revenue flowing quickly. But, you know, we were pragmatic. That was going to be challenging. To market CDs was going to be difficult for us because we were one small organization in London trying to appeal to an audience spread fairly thinly on a global level. We envisaged that really revenue would only start flowing once, you know, digital music really became established. And although Napster was sort of getting headlines back in 1999 and 2000, you know, digital music itself wasn't reaching big audiences globally until 10 years later. And so we envisaged like 5 years until we start making some money and are able to pay profits to players. We got lucky, you know, with our 5th recording, you know, made it at the end of our 1st year, we won a succession of Grammy Awards, and that propelled the label forward. And, you know, because we were operating really on very low cost, I mean, at the time I was running the label, I was also a warehouse manager. I did all the packing of boxes, loading them onto pallets. You know, fortunately, the business model worked, but it was a risk, and it's a risk for musicians to sort of like to give up the notion that you get a session fee for making a recording or for appearing on television. And, you know, the idea that you will have a profit share or a royalty which might support your income in years to come, maybe even top up your pension. That sounds great, but it's a risk.
Postscriptum maybe for some business students who may hear that panel, the very chief executive officer who negotiated with his former colleagues, who was a cello player at that time in the orchestra 2 years before, is now the head of the Carnegie Hall. So risk pays off, and that is also the case with Chaz's career. Christian, tell us.
Can I just have a quick question? So you say that the musician gets a profit share of the recording. Is that per individual recording, or is it as a part of their sort of general salary? Because like the musicians of the London Symphony Orchestra, of course, change constantly. And so 300 recordings later, how do you keep track on who has profit on what?
a database. Yeah, and that's the way that it was structured, was that we treated every single recording as an individual cost center. And so we costed every single recording separately. We knew the musicians on the on that recording, some of whom, of course, would be members of the orchestra. Some might be session musicians or on trial, and might then leave the orchestra. Doesn't matter. We still assigned a share to every single player, and of course conductors and soloists as well. So it may sound challenging, but actually that's quite simple.
Thanks very, very, very much. We have the real privilege of having not only one, but two label founders. With this, Gabriel, we come back to you as an artist and very much an knowledge composer, but maybe just now, very short feedback on non-classical. So why did you decide to have the burden on your shoulders of doing exactly what Chaz was describing, a quite highly sophisticated industry in which you have to masterize and you have to produce and you have to send and you have to track record, etc. So when and why?
So for me, non-classical was, this goes back to 2004. That's when I started the label. And also alongside with it, we had these club nights. And I think a lot of my motivations were very similar to those that Christian spoke about, and this belief in classical music actually really appealing to a much wider and younger audience than it's given credit for. And I'd previously played in bands and I'd produced electronic music and grime music, and I knew about this culture of releasing music quickly when you make it. And I'd written a string quartet, my first string quartet, in 2003. And my instinct was, okay, it's got to be released. And then I looked at the classical music industry and I realized it's not going to be released now. I've got to find a string quartet who've won an award. They've got to want to record my quartet. I've got to probably be 20 years older, be an established award-winning composer myself. Everything is so stretched out. And so I just thought, well, I know how labels work. I was running already a small electronic music label. That was called Non-Stop at the time. So I thought, okay, I'll do the classical branch, Non-Stop Classical, and release this string quartet. But Non-Stop Classical was a bit of a mouthful. And I thought, how about just non-classical? And then that actually gained a new meaning, which was this whole idea of questioning the traditions of classical music. So it's about presenting classical music in a non-classical way, in a non-traditional way. So it's actually can be confusing because it is classical music that we're doing, but it's just not done in the classical way. And that was then the other big theme for me, was this whole thing of presentation, of saying, look, classical music is missing a lot of its audience because it's presented in this musicological way, in a historical way. There's all this assumed knowledge of all these great composers and great performers, and actually, unless you're in this small bubble of people who are fortunate enough to grow up inside classical music, which is a tiny bubble, it will all be meaningless to you. But somehow people within the bubble, they forget that knowledge that they have. They take it for granted, and that suddenly leaves all these other people out in the cold. So the album covers were more inspired by, I'd say, popular music and electronic music. And then we were doing the events in nightclubs, again, to create a much more informal and just presentable way. So that's how it all started, really, as being a composer in my 20s, having played in nightclubs, having played in festivals with a band. And then suddenly, as soon as I changed to classical music, my audience was 3 times my age. It was just, or at least twice my age. And it just seemed really bizarre. No one seemed to really be bothered as well. That's what surprised me. All the young musicians, they would just take it for granted. This is just how it is. You're 20, but your audience is 60, but that's fine. It's like, well, why aren't your friends coming? I invited my friends to my concerts, but they didn't come because it would be a Sunday recital that didn't fit in with their lifestyle. So it was all about trying to think how you can change it. And then, so focusing more on the record label, for us, actually, I would say, Chaz was very optimistic about the coming of the digital digital downloads, and then now streaming, which is kind of another chapter. But for us, being an independent label, our income was really more dependent on CD and vinyl sales at the beginning. And you kind of, even with, it's a small independent label, but you kind of guaranteed a certain amount of income when you do physical. But when it goes down to download, that was okay. And then streaming, it's just a disaster really, unless you're shifting incredible units. And a lot of our releases are contemporary classical music, so it is, even though we're reaching new audiences, it still is a smaller audience. It's an independent audience, and so that side has been tough for us. And but there was, I guess we were also trying to compete in some ways with other genres of music. We were trying to say classical music is a genre that you should consider as a teenager or a 20-something, 30-something. You say you like electronic music, you like jazz, you like drum and bass or whatever. Well, actually, you will like classical music. It's the big challenge is always to get it, is the promotional side, and that's sort of another big topic.
Yeah, maybe point of detail, contrary to the London Symphony Orchestra, you were working with independent musicians. I mean, you couldn't permit them, even if you did not break even 5 years later, not to have them paid in somewhere. So how did you have also that goodwill that Christian was mentioning among younger musicians generations, that they were okay with investing?
Yeah, I mean, again, it actually connected back to the model of an independent record label, which is that with a major label, they'll pay in advance and they'll pay a fee up front. But the independent record labels tend to say, look, we're investing our money in it, but as soon as we make a profit, we're going to share it 50-50 with you. So whereas with a major label, you're getting just a few percentage points. So it's quite a different scale. But obviously there isn't this big fee up front. And that's been an interesting experience dealing with musicians on that, because some musicians get it. They say, okay, actually, I know that really the recording is about promoting us as musicians. It's actually just a calling card, and it puts us out in the world. If we don't do this album, our music just won't be available. People won't know us. And I found that as a composer, within 2 years, 3 years of the label coming out, I suddenly started getting a lot of my music in contemporary dance and ballet projects, and that was because the music was out there. People were finding it in record shops or online. And so that was always the thing we'd say to the musicians is, you've got to see that it's changed. But we would get some ensembles who just assumed they were going to get an advance, and then that they were going to get this sort of star record label treatment. And it was very frustrating for us, because I never made any money directly from the label at all. And because any money that was made was going straight back into it. And it was really done as a bigger picture thing to try and promote contemporary music. And I was also, on the side, I was getting more promotion as a composer myself. So when people then kind of made all these demands of us and expected, then wanted us to maybe do big high quality videos for them and things like this, they didn't understand that it just doesn't work like that anymore. And in fact, some labels have moved their model to the point where now the artists are paying the label. There's a lot of classical labels out there that will charge £3,000 or £4,000 to the artist for the service of being released. We've never done that, and as a matter of principle, we really don't want to do that. But some of our releases, you said Chaz said 5 years. For us, it's been, I'd say 10 years we started to be able to pay royalties to some musicians. And that was a really nice moment. But they weren't, to be honest, they knew that they benefited in other ways from the release. So I think, and I think that's everyone can see that's the way the industry is evolving, for better or for worse. Those days of huge $1 million coming in from record sales are pretty much gone, really. We're entering another era.
Great. I have the feeling, and you will just tell me if I'm wrong or right, that we are now facing kind of shift, which is not to be felt now on stage yet, but we will probably in the 2 next seasons be already perceivable. And I would love to, and please, Chaz, under your control, because you were the one giving me some of these figures. I will want to now to share with you some of the paradoxes we are facing. In the streaming services, I was said that the demographics, for instance, of classical music under quotation mark listeners is somehow younger than the one of, let's say, mainstream pop. Okay, so that's one of the first paradoxes. One of the second is that our stars, or I mean, our pop stars, so to say, the most popular stars, have been dying between 1750 and 1832, let's say. So a long time ago. So this is also kind of paradox, because they don't obviously get interviews or don't obviously show Instagram pictures or stories. You know what I mean? Maybe a third, and you see what where I want you to go with that. Maybe a third one is that people do listen to let's say tracks which are part of our individually of our culture, let's say Prelude in C major, Bach, but they have absolutely no idea that they are listening to that. They are indeed listening to, I don't know how to call it, Let's Have a Good Sleep playlist. You know, so this is three major paradoxes for us who've spent, and it is a little bit, it can make us also angry, and all the more the musicians among you and us, having spent 15 years of hard work, not going and playing tennis or having family life, and just to see that millions, not to say billions, of people are listening to great music, but not for the reason why we adore it, because it's well interpreted, it's you know, sophisticatedly crafted, it's made by people with talent and inspiration. So you see what I mean. Please give me your insight. But maybe let's start with Chaz this time, with your cap as Chartmetric head of commercial affairs and partnerships in the world. I am more or less right, or didn't I see the big pictures exactly as it is?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much you're right. And yeah, classical music's audience is younger than rock music. So, and several other genres of music. Classical music's audience today on streaming services globally is younger than rock. There's other genres which appeal to a slightly younger audience, but pretty much classical's in the middle. It's pretty much the same as overall music. And, you know, we always have this notion in the classical world. I mean, if you go back to the way classical music used to be marketed, that we were producing great CDs and selling them to, you know, essentially men over the age of 55. That was the target audience for every single record company, male over the age of 55. And, you know, we marketed every CD in absolutely the same way. We said it was a great recording, okay, which was you had to listen to. It was a definitive account of so-and-so work by this great pianist. You know, the marketing spiel was exactly the same. And it was always, you know, it was always marketed to this male over the age of 55 audience, who would then take the disc home, place it on their CD player, sit in a comfortable chair and listen end to end to Götterdämmerung. And the reality is that very, very few people ever did that, even the people who work for the record companies. And most of the people who work for the record companies weren't men over the age of 55 in the first place. And, you know, I always had this feeling that, you know, classical music was, you know, listening was contextual. And we often say today, when we describe the way people are listening to music on streaming services, that 90% of listening is contextual. People don't necessarily listen to something because they're told it's a great recording and they have to listen to it. People listen to a piece of music, whether that's BTS or whether it's Beethoven. They listen because of where they are, what they're doing, the time of the day, how they're feeling, what the weather is like, what season it is. These are the things which determine what people will listen to. And classical music plays a part in this. You know, it's many people would never describe themselves as classical music fans, but they listen to some classical music when they are doing an activity where they want to listen to classical music. Now that may sound sort of like appalling to many people who revere classical music, but in a sense, that is the way we all listen to music. And it's not something which is new to the digital age. It's something which has always happened that way. I think many classical CDs in the past, you know, very few people have listened to, people who bought CDs or LPs in the past, they didn't take them home and listen to them end to end. They listened to one particular movement. And then they put it away on the shelf and got it out again a few days later to listen to that same individual movement. So people have always taken snapshots of music. People have always listened to music in context. And classical music, and we've seen this especially over the past year, the context in which we've all spent our lives in over the past year has benefited classical music. Hence, as has been widely reported, classical music consumption on streaming services has gone up over the past year with people locked down. Oh, Eric, you're on mute.
Gabriel, please.
I want to ask Chaz a question. So, you know, when we talk about the context that we want to, that people, let's say a lot of people want to listen to classical music, I'm guessing the context is a bit the one that Eric pointed at, which is classical music as relaxation, chill out, calming music, you know, this relaxing piano, etc. Am I right? Is that the kind of predominant, or is there quite a big range in how in the different contexts, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, undoubtedly, you know, a lot of people are listening to classical music for to relax, or to have on in the background when they're working, or to provide them with inspiration. And you know, everybody refers to Spotify's playlist Peaceful Piano, which started out as an overtly classical music playlist 8 years ago, but these days is sort of like all the music is written almost specifically for that playlist these days. So yeah, in a sense, people generally listen to classical music for relaxing music, but I think it's a little bit broader than we give it credit for. Everybody focuses on peaceful piano, but the range is much broader than that. And I've got to say that, you know, compared to so many other genres of music, this notion of creating contextual playlists or thinking that our listeners might listen in a contextual way to music hasn't really been exploited much in the classical world. Yes, there are playlists like Peaceful Piano, but you know, it's not as sophisticated. The playlisting and curation of music, curation is a nicer word than playlisting. The curation of music in other genres is far more sophisticated than it is in classical music at the moment. And I think that is an opportunity for, you know, classical musicians and the industry as a whole.
Yeah, thanks, Chaz. We come back to this because I think there is also an algorithmic and AI component. But maybe back to the promoters among you, Arna and Christian. What could be the consequences when the concert hall will open again? They have done now, partly on the European continent and the UK, and it's coming in Asia and North America. Which are the consequences? How do you talk with music directors and with musicians on these paradoxes?
Well, you know, I just want to, because, you know, it's interesting, you know, with this playlist and, you know, because we're actually thinking of introducing, because now like I said, with the opening, you know, it's getting people back into the buildings. It's getting people back and to show them, you know, the importance of experiencing this music that you know, have come across digitally live and how different that is. So we're actually, you know, preparing where we're trying to tap into this, and we call it Knuckles playlist. So we are actually, you know, producing concerts like that with, you know, where we're kind of referring to the playlist on you know, Spotify, but then come inside the hall and experience the orchestra playing this live to you, and so that, you know, that to emphasize that, yeah, I mean, it's great to you know, get to know this music, but it's so different when you see musicians perform and when you're a part of that performance, because I think this is what I you know, the audience, but you know, they're creating that moment with you, you know, with the musicians on stage, and it's this kind of a joint. And of course, that's what we miss so terribly during this, you know, the past months. So I think we're at, you know, yeah, this crisis have in so many ways given us extraordinary opportunities to kind of reinvent and kind of position ourselves, you know, like you say, because they've been discovering this music more, they have been, you know, hearing this, and of course, because we have been reaching, you know, like millions, whereas before we didn't, at least, you know, through the digital medium, you know, with this sudden, you know, opportunity to be there. So it's gonna be, you know, it's almost giving us kind of a second chance in some way.
Doesn't it look a little bit like in James Cameron's Avatar? I mean, I have the feeling we all feel a little bit like Sigourney Weaver's role there. I mean, we have the feeling there are huge opportunities and we have the science, we understand, but we are coming in a planet with people we don't know and they don't know us. And this is an open door for a lot of misunderstandings. I don't know, Christian, your people who come during 3 days or 2 days and experience clubhouse music plus string quartets by Bartók. So these are the people who have listened now to these contextual playlists.
Yeah, I would say the other way around. Like they come and hear Beethoven and then they go clubbing, but or they accidentally want to go clubbing and they get exposed to Beethoven and realize it's actually very nice. And I think there's two sides to this. Like on one hand, I think the streaming experience, let's say I think we don't talk about the streaming of the orchestras doing now because that's a quite different thing than, let's say, Spotify or Netflix or HBO. I think to begin with, the classical music experience for especially Spotify is very, very underwhelming to begin with. I mean, I think this is something they are just about to, I think they have recently discovered this, and I've heard that there are people working on that. So that's I think also a little bit maybe for the future misleading that everyone is going to listen to playlists, because that's basically the only thing you can find on Spotify. Even if you know what you're looking for on Spotify, you still can't find it. I mean, I really know what I want to listen to, and I know specific recordings, and I know they're there, and I can't find them. So that's one thing, and so I think one has to take that with a pinch of salt to a certain extent. Now, the other thing I think is that, as it's very interesting that Chaz said that classical music is bigger than rock and pop. I always claim that the people that have anything against classical music is the Beatles and the Stones generation that made a sort of revolt against their parents listening to classical music. And now we want to be different and we're not going to listen to this. I think the generation now has no opinion about it, really no opinion. And the only thing that is in between them buying a ticket as a date night to the symphony orchestra is just that it's a scary void going to the concert hall, and that there's no one, you know, just taking them on the hand, like, it's not dangerous, I'll take you to this concert. These, I mean, just to give you, I take this example sometimes. Let's say that you have never gone to a concert, you have never gone to the symphony orchestra, but you go to restaurants and you go to theater, you try the ballet, and I don't know, you try various things, and it's like, okay, we're gonna go to the Stockholm Philharmonic, or I don't know, and you go to the orchestra's website, and you think like, okay, we're gonna find a nice concert to go to. You find 300 concerts there on the webpage of an average medium-sized city concert hall. Like, where do you even start there? Like, there's not even like, I think the classical music business in that sense haven't really figured, I mean, there's not even like, for you that have never been here before, these are the 5 concerts we recommend you going to, because any orchestra manager will know that, well, if you haven't been to a concert, maybe don't go to that concert. Maybe that is a very unusual Schumann oratorio that is a little bit more for the insiders, or maybe you like it. I mean, there's not even like any kind of like inviting curation for people that have never been there. And I say this very carefully because the young people are very interested in food. They don't go to a random restaurant. They will go to 7 blogs and cross-reference which the references, and until they find something they like. And there's no way of figuring out what's on the menu even for the classical music on a concert hall. So I think that's the one thing. But I think lastly, I think most importantly, I'm not afraid for the live experience, because I think if there's one thing the pandemic has shown us is that we like to be in a room with other people, even if we don't know them, and experience something that it's diabolically boring to sit at home and listen to and watch stuff. So I think it's really the challenge now is to remove this kind of invisible barrier, and some concert halls are really successful in doing that also. I remember when I studied in London, the Royal Festival Hall was like a dangerous spot in London. That's only 20 years ago. No one would go there unless you would go to a concert or performance. And now it's like a spot where people are, and I think that's like the first small step into making the genres, attractive and accessible, to be honest, because it's in the end, like, it's not a problem if someone comes to the hall and says, I don't like this. It's no problem. Like, I'm sure of the 10% will come and say, like, this is not for me. But like, we are reaching there's such a small percentage of people that even tries it. And I think, the potential audience, the potential to just double the audience for classical music in any given city, it's not so far away, because there's such a small amount of people that have even dared to go into it, just because they don't feel the social context of the experience is alien.
That's
Mostly
good
about the playlist and algorithms. Netflix still hasn't figured out what I like, so I think it's also like a question. Well, and I try to help it, liking things I don't like and disliking other movies, etc., because I want Netflix to find me movies and things, and it never works. So I think also that algorithm aspect has a long way to go also. So I think one should not draw too steep conclusions about situation right now.
Not to get too personal, but maybe Christian, due to the fact that the algorithm doesn't understand, I don't know, your enthusiasm for Avengers Endgame and North Korean movies. I don't know, that was a joke. Gabriel, did you feel in the sales figures of non-classical something boiling in the last months, and which could be related to the fact that more people are listening to a music genre that they haven't been used to while they were commuting, and now they're sitting at home and making more exercise?
Well, what's been interesting for non-classical actually is the label over the last 18 months, year or so, is we spend a lot of our time doing live events and these club events, and also we have young composers, 4 associate composers. We're supporting that scheme, but because we couldn't do the live events for a year, we sort of doubled our efforts on the label, and the label literally doubled its output for the whole of last year, and suddenly we were much more active. And that was a very positive thing for the label, because being a small label, we were doing just a handful of releases every year, and suddenly our release schedule, I think we did about something like 15 releases last year, which is actually, the previous year was 4 releases or 5 releases. And when you're more proactive, your presence just increases generally, just on the social media, in people's lives. People just become more aware of you, you get more reviews, etc. So by being more active, we just suddenly found definitely getting a lot more listens. And we also did, a big priority for us was to support the musicians and composers that we are in our community that we work with. And so we did a series of compilations called I hope this finds you well in these strange times. And that was the line that everyone started. Any email you received last year probably started with that phrase. So that was that. And we did 2 volumes to start with. Then before we knew it, we'd done 4 volumes, and they actually sold very well. And what was nice is people bought them directly from us on Bandcamp, which is an independent platform for mainly independent labels, when most of the income comes directly to the label. And you can stream the album, but you're encouraged to buy it. And a lot of people did buy it because they wanted to listen, but they also wanted to support these different musicians, and they were very eclectic albums. You know, we had some really experimental work, some improvs when people had just got together in a socially distanced way in a room, or maybe even sent each other 2 separate recordings. Or there was me, I did a track when I was playing around with a new bit of electronic equipment I just bought. And then we had some more ensemble stuff. Some people even found things they had on the hard drive. But so, yeah, so for us, I mean, we're a small label. The challenge for us on the streaming platforms is promotion and actually getting noticed, you know, and also that we're not, and a lot of our music is, we do have some more down tempo kind of, I would say, playlist type tracks, but a lot of the stuff is more involved. It's just probably you'd get it once you'd seen a live concert and you kind of got what it was about with some of the contemporary work. There's a balance. I mean, that's another discussion in a way. There is music that really works well to listen at home in the background, and then there's other music that just doesn't lend it so well to so much to that, and actually is primarily music to be performed live. And it's this, and so it's also about managing your expectations with what you think streaming, what can stream, you know, and so it's about maybe having tracks that work for streaming, that get people to know you, get your name out there, and then when they see you in concert, then they'll get the full story, you know, because you can't tell the full story on streaming. As Chaz was saying, you know, people buy a CD, they listen to only some tracks work at home, but then the whole symphony works in the concert hall. So that's why I've digressed from your original question, but
no, you did not at all. I couldn't be more grateful. We didn't rehearse, promised. So that was the best transition ever, because now comes a very hard part. We have been together more than 1 hour, and we come really to the core of our subject. I mean, does all these acceleration of digital change in some way, in all its dimensions, does it change the way we listen to music, and does it change the way composers are writing music? Are we entering into a kind of new functionalism as we did 100 years ago? Paul hinted a bit with Zeit opera, time operas, etc., functional music. That was even the beginning of a festival like Donaueschingen, who is now having its 100th birthday, a century. So are we facing now this kind of new aesthetical phenomenon in which the same composer will have to have a kind of marketing strategy? Maybe to introduce that, as a composition teacher, Chaz, who will tell us a little more about the way algorithms are now used by people in certain musical genres to influence what listeners are having to consume, and how can we understand exactly which processes are going on there to adapt our marketing. In one word, if we were all together Peter Gelb, what would we do or tell our marketing department in New York City, Peter Gelb or whosoever who is in charge of a great institution, or Arna in Ottawa?
Oh God! In one word, I would say, well, I think Peter Gelb needs to be telling his marketing team to get him on TikTok. But no, that's not a good idea. Algorithms, you know, algorithms often sound like terrifying things. You know, it basically services, digital services, and social networks. I mean, let's get this right. It's not just digital services, digital music services which use algorithms. Everything you look at on the internet, everything you search for on Google, everything you look at on social networks is influenced or determined by algorithms. And all algorithms are simple decisions which are made by a machine replicating decisions which would normally be made by a human being. You know, they're not always right, but you know, human beings, when they make decisions, are not always right. Therefore, algorithms are not always right. Does that make sense? And you know, basically, most services, again, social networks and streaming services, they're using algorithms to figure out what you like and to serve you more of it. And sometimes they use complex algorithms which listen to music or study videos to determine what the sort of content is and to serve it more to people who are the appropriate audience. But algorithms are not, in a sense, things which are deliberately shaping music. They're just replicating simple human decision making en masse, because we all use social networks and streaming services so much that there are simply not enough people to make all the editorial decisions.
And how can we bias algorithms? How can we be smarter than they are for our own purposes?
We often talk about cooking algorithms, and you can cook algorithms in different ways. I mean, there are a lot of people who write music for streaming services based on algorithms. They study individual playlists and try and write music which will appeal to those algorithms. Now, that may sound appalling. That may sound an absolutely terrible thing to be happening, but it's always happened. We've always written music to a specific set of criteria. Radio has often demanded that music is edited, and music's always been edited, adapted, or written specifically for a specific set of criteria. And so I don't think that necessarily writing music to appeal to the algorithms is necessarily a problem, again, because algorithms are just replicating human decision making. The decisions the algorithms are making are decisions which were previously made by human beings. Does that make sense?
Okay, Christian.
I think the tricky thing to understand with this, because I have a few friends that have discovered this little lucrative as a side project. But I think the tricky thing is to understand the data from this, right, in a way that this is music that sounds a bit like classical music, let's say, and behaves a bit the same way, but in a way it's not. I mean, in the definition that I think of classical music as an art form, in that sense, it's not the same, and that's why I also have a little bit sort of skepticism to the numbers of it, because it doesn't help. Understanding this means that I understand a bit sort of it's almost like pop music in the worst sense of the word, that yeah, it has a very clear function, maybe not to get you excited but calm you down, let's say, very simplified. But what I'm not struggling with, but by what I am working with every day, is how to get more people to have artistic experience, like in the sense that the true artistic experience of the art form. And I think it's true that these playlists that say, I mean, you know the name better than, I mean, and sometimes you're lucky when you release a CD that your one or two movements ends up on there because you make some money. As a separate subject, actually, the business model of the streaming services, which doesn't work for us, but it's not the same. It's like they're not necessarily listening to classical music as an art form in that sense, and it doesn't help us in that moment to get them into a hall. I think there's a different kind of metric, different kind of way to get people to have an experience in the concert hall. The road from the east, the sleeping Spotify playlist to the concert hall is quite long, and I'm not sure if there's even a line from it.
Well, I think it's easy to get sidetracked by the phenomenal success of peaceful piano music and playlists which feature that. That it's just one playlist. There's all sorts of different variations and opportunities there. The market is much bigger than that, and there is room for all sorts of different tastes. And also, although people look at these playlists and think, wow, they're reaching such a huge audience, more people actually listen to music which is completely personalized for them on streaming services. And so now you've highlighted already that often the algorithms and streaming services are not very good at determining your exact taste. You know, sometimes they're right, often they're wrong. But you know, they're right a reasonable amount of the time. And you know, and that personalization is something which can only be done by algorithm or math.
My feeling is just that these algorithms, I think we should not judge them too much right now, because I think this is a very early stage of this also, isn't it? In a sense, that's what I meant with my, I mean, I might have a very quite specific music taste, but I don't really have so much that in when I go to other app like stream movies and television series. And I still think it still gives me what everyone else is watching, rather than something based on what would like to watch.
They are quite uneducated. Is that right? That's why
taste. It's not question. It's not. I'm not judging anyone. It's more a question of like.
They also need maybe some new semantics. I remember, Gabriel, as we were preparing the show together, you were telling me there may be some need for naming things differently. So there is a classical music, which is an art music form, which is part of our culture, but there is also a sort of piano music. There is a strings music. Maybe we should be a little bit more creative in that, and maybe expanding a little bit the semantic boundaries. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a minefield, all the labels, because most people, everyone wants to just be their art form to be taken as seriously as possible. And I mean, I think that certainly for younger audiences, yeah, the term classical music had been off-putting, but I think discussion now is sort of saying, well, no, people don't really care so much about that. I mean, certainly contemporary classical music, you know, in some contemporary classical music just feels so detached from the historical classical music that they shouldn't even have the same, they shouldn't have, the term classical music doesn't quite work for both, you know, and there could be, it feels like we need to have some huge conference and get the industry together and let's all kind of battle it out and do a kind of rebranding of different things, you know, and yeah, maybe, you know, the art music term as well, you know, you know, even in one composer's output. Last night, on Wednesday, I went to a live concert in King's Place in London, and there were some Shostakovich piano pieces, which were all from the 50s, from his film music. And some of it was really sentimental. And there's the famous waltzes from Gadfly and the Jazz Suite. And there's kind of pop music almost, you know, it's film, he wrote it for film. And I was thinking, and then some of the pieces, even really sentimental, schmaltzy. And you think, is this even the same composer that wrote those symphonies, those dark, powerful symphonies? And it is. But are they the same genre? Probably he himself would probably say, no, they're not. You know, one is film music, it's almost cabaret, it's light music, and then the other is real symphonies. And but each has a value as well. The other thing is there's the problem in the classical world, we have this hang up about, we have this superiority complex. And it's not that it's better or worse, it's for a different function. And I think that's the important thing to recognize as well. You know, that some music, you do want some lighter, easier music to relax to that might be played by classical musicians when you're at home. And so, you know, I think probably generally with streaming music, it is about slightly more functional, easier music. But in the concert hall, then that's when you you know, you want something more challenging. And so and neither of those are better, have a higher value, because they each make our lives richer. And you know, and you could say, okay, in the concert hall it's a deeper, more profound experience, but actually just having some great easy music in the background in the daytime is, in the bigger scheme of things, still is very important in your life. It makes your quality of life better. So yeah, it's very interesting, the question of labels and I mean, I guess it works itself out, you know, by calling things peaceful piano music, that sidesteps genre. So that's quite clever in a way.
Not sure Christian does agree with everything you've said, but Arna, would you think your audience would agree and feel, okay, we would love also to listen to some of the composers, Anna Sokolovich, for instance, you named her. would love to hear also what Anna could be composing for our background music, or as a kind of background music to our life, or exercise, or sleep helping.
Well, at least, you know, for Anna's pieces, I mean, they're very accessible. So, you know, you certainly, you know, you don't sort of, you can, you know, enjoy it just by experiencing it, you know, without any other references really. But I would say sort of in labeling, you know, what I like to talk about in terms of the orchestra is actually orchestral music, because we do so much, you know, it's not just one genre, we just do orchestra, you know, and that's how I try to sort of phrase it. And I think that's important, you know, so that's my business. I'm in the business of, you know, taking care and running this orchestra as an entity.
We use the same label actually for our festival. We call it symphonic. We just tell we play symphonic music. That's the only kind of label. And then most people realize it's classical music, but it's okay. It's
but I mean, it's like, you know, we play computer game music, we could film music. It's just all kind. We just use an orchestra to do. That's the instrument, and that's what we are sort of, you know, presenting. So
yeah, we also have pop music, by the way, Eric. So it's also like we do. It's the experience of the orchestra is for what's the essential, and the live sound of this amazing body.
Yeah.
Let's come maybe to a kind of concluding point. There would be many others, and it was absolutely fascinating again. As I was talking to Chaz a week ago, he was telling me, you know what, classical music has something which is quite different from many other genres. It is the ultimate global music. So it's everywhere. And it's not only everywhere, but it's mostly in metropolis. I mean, very well also in, you know, with concrete walls and architecture. And as we know, in People's Republic of China, for instance, or in the Middle East, there are more and more concert halls being built. So is it something in which you would say, let's say, in 10 years, the usual programming in some major city in China or in North America or Europe, will you still have that kind of I don't know, symphonic repertoire and recitals, etc.? Or will we probably, or would you say we will probably also have a completely other kind of offer at 6 a.m. in the morning, the breakfast music, I don't know, environment, and live from the concert hall at 9 a.m. that start working? You see what I mean? Is there something like that we can play together?
Yeah, I mean, you're right about what you said. Classical music is one of the few genres which really reaches a global audience. Classical's audience is pretty evenly spread around the world, slightly dense, slightly bigger in certain markets, but it's pretty much global. That's the very few genres which really have such an even spread around the world. The challenge for classical is it's quite thinly spread. So there's no market which is particularly much bigger than others. You know, Japan, Korea, Germany, slightly bigger than others, but not to any real notable degree. I think the real opportunity, and also this comes back to algorithms, it's your popularity, build an audience. I mean, at Chartmetric, we rank every single artist based on their followings and engagement across not just streaming services, but social networks. And, you know, and the chart for classical musicians is quite bizarre, because when you look across social networks and streaming services, the most popular classical artist is Beethoven. And, you know, I don't know how active he is on TikTok. I don't know whether he's produced many videos recently. But, you know, he's not a living artist. It goes without saying. And I think, you know, basically with classical music, one of the challenges we have to overcome is to use social media more effectively, and we need to almost dissociate the term social from media. It is media today. It's the media which people are consuming, all age groups, all demographics. You know, we often say that, you know, Facebook in particular is now relevant for pop artists, because the audience on users of Facebook just are not teenage anymore. Teenagers don't use Facebook. So, you know, I think we need to overcome this and use these platforms for what they actually represent, which is an opportunity to really engage audiences, to get our content and our name in front of them, to get them following us so we can go back to them and continue to engage them, because then we will increase our opportunities to get them into the concert hall in the future.
Anyone else who want to react to my small science fiction series? Arna, will you still do the same? Do you think in Ottawa you will have exactly the same kind of framework in a couple of years?
Well, I think this is just so true with the social media. Now, this is the platform where we can really sort of build proper, audience for us, and that's where we need to be focusing on. So I think Chaz is absolutely right.
What I would add, I think the real challenge for classical music and social media is that social media is all based on these very short clips. It's always about getting, there's that thing, isn't it? It can, on the analytics, someone watched your clip for more than 2 seconds or 3 seconds. That's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with grabbing someone in that. So that's the big problem for classical music, is that the world of social media is super fast. So a lot of our repertoire doesn't necessarily translate that well to it. So, or at least you've got to find a very clever way of distilling down something into a very catchy video clip. And I mean, we have, the power of the orchestra filmed well, it can be very arresting. And obviously the musicians that we have are just remarkable. That's the biggest wealth of classical music, the talent. And so it's about getting that, somehow to grab people's attention very quickly when they're scrolling through. So I mean, that's, and then we're competing against much bigger budgets in the cinema, at Netflix and pop worlds as well, and who are making, so we've got our strengths. It's about finding our way to get them across quickly.
And I think there is one social media platform where classical music does well and has done well for a long time, and that's YouTube.
Yeah.
And okay, lots of people sort of like switch off after 3 seconds of a YouTube video, but a lot of people watch through, and classical music actually, I think, really has performed overall better on YouTube than any other genre of music. It's not that it's been, classical videos have been watched more, but classical musicians have embraced YouTube. Yeah. They've seen it for what it offers, which is something alternative, something better, something more powerful than television. Television, which was prescriptive, which forced people to watch at a specific time and meant people only in one location could watch. YouTube suddenly has democratized everything and made content available whenever you want on a global level. Classical music with people like Medici have really sort of like really embraced that and taken the opportunity. And I think, and there are other social media platforms, notably Twitch, which potentially provide one step beyond even what YouTube offers.
You have the conclusive word.
No, I think again, it's a bit like when you talk about social media. I think when one talks about social media is that one has to understand what one is doing on the various platforms. I think, for instance, I think I would say Instagram and Facebook for artists and institutions are basically marketing platforms, which are slightly interactive. Let's put it like that. I mean, as far as I can, I mean, it's very possible that they could be more than that, but I think also the way the direction. I think when we started the Gränsländet 5 years ago, we didn't need to boost any post on our page to reach people. There was an organic reach. Now you can't reach anyone without paying for it. I mean, we have quite a large organic reach, which is very nice, but like if you don't push it a bit, you don't reach anyone. And I think that's okay. I mean, that's basically the new. In the past, Orchestra used to take out advertisements in newspapers. We don't do that. So you take advertisements on Facebook or on Instagram. But the question again for me is a bit like there's two opportunities here. On one hand, yes, we should embrace social media and be part of this because we should be. That's one. But the other side is also that especially the classical music art form, as I call it, or symphonic music, whatever you want to call it, the experience, and it's the opposite of it. And I think we need to embrace that more. I think that's a very this is a very, let's say, underdeveloped side of our art form. We're always our art form is constantly trying to adapt to this quick thing, that is basically determined by pop music and executives. But it's basically the strength of the experience. And this is why we might have a smaller audience in percentages, but our audience keeps coming back for the rest of their life when they get hooked, is that it offers space, it offers headspace, it offers reflection, like true reflection, not something that goes on in the background when you light some candles and open a glass of wine after can also be that after a long day at work. But most importantly, you go to a concert hall, you go into sort of ritual, and you can concentrate in a group of other people, and you focus on this, let's say, piece that we have been listening to for 8 or 9 generations. Take Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, for instance. It has been listened to for, let's say, 150 years, because it was not a great hit at the beginning, but for 150 years. So it connects us to people of our past, into the present, to our grandparents. We all listen to, I mean, interpretations and versions have changed, but in essence, it's this constant in human life. And there are not so many constants that connects us to our history and our predecessors. I remember Werner Herzog telling in an interview that the only constant in human experience is the speed of walking. It's the only thing that defines the distance between two spaces. Has been and in a way there are not so many other ones. And in a way that classical music and this experience of these works can offer this. And I think has not been explored enough. I'm not the marketing genius that knows how to, communicate this to the next. Let's say if there's in an average sort of million city, let's say there are 3,000 people that goes to classical music every week. Let's say that means that maybe there are 100,000 at least that would buy tickets to make this happen. Let's say the next 3,000 should be fair. I mean, how do we get to them with this message? I think this is the big question.
I've been using this kind of image, when people go and hug trees, and the energy and this kind of connection to time, like you say, and when you hug when you see the trees in England, like in Stratford upon Avon, they're like 400 years old, and you go and hug a 400-year-old tree, and then I thought, that's just like listening to Beethoven. It's like hugging a 150-year-old tree or 200-year-old tree. It's that kind of a connection to the time and that energy and that stoic kind of, and I think we will become part of that conversation, when we need to shift our focus because of, the climate change and crisis and all, when human race needs really to rethink itself, So I think we'll play a big part in that. Hugging trees, listening to Beethoven.
Oh, I could imagine a better conclusion.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. And another thing which is constant in always the high level of this web seminar, thanks to the participants, and this time again, I think we have opened absolutely astonishing doors and food for thought. Thanks warmly from the heart, bottom of my heart, and to all of you. To be followed. It's a long story. Classical music in some way has started not non-classical at all, and the future will probably be a little bit more diverse than the one we have thought about, but for sure will be also very, very interesting to follow up. Back to Paris and to the Centre National de la Musique. See you soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you. That has been really fascinating to follow your exchange and discussions. And I think I have learned a lot, and we have to find ways to make this continue. I think it's very beneficial for all of us and for the industry globally. So I hope that we will be in touch again very soon. And thank you for listening for our audience, and we will see you again very soon. Thank you and goodbye.